Good morning and welcome to Sundays at Chaumont, where I break down what we've done in the week in the more technical aspects and let you know why we've done what we've done and what that means for the project going forward. So this week has been a big visual change and it's all about coating the internal walls with lime. Now, we had our friend Alan spend a good few months here chipping off all the old render of the chateau. So it's a prepped shell ready for us doing this spraying. It's areas like this which he hasn't done yet where you can see the old construction and the old layers of the render. So you had this coat here which was a lime coat, which is the same as what we're doing now. That was sprayed directly against a stone or brick. Then after that you had this coat which was like a rougher plaster. It's like a base scratch coat for the final finish. Then on top you had a very, very thin but very, very flat coat of plaster of Paris. And that was the finished wall back in the day. There was no frame, there was no insulation. Any wires from here on out would have been either chiselled into the plaster and re-plastered up, or they would have been surface mounted. So what we're doing is putting back this scratch coat of lime. So what we're left with after he's done all that and chipped it off is the bare wall, which is a mixture between stone and brick, and it depends. Some of that's chimney based, some of it's old repairs. But we've got this kind of mishmash here, and the reason we're coating it in lime is because at the moment we've got all this kind of crumbliness. There's a few bricks that have been degraded. So what the lime does is tie all that together. For one, it fills all these little voids in bricks, stops anything being able to move about, and it makes it breathable. And you're probably wondering, what does like breathable actually mean? The wall's not actually physically breathing, certainly not passing air through the wall, but what breathable means is that because of the old construction, because it was mud and lime and stone, it means vapour or water can pass into the wall. Now, with a cement render, which is more durable than this and what a lot of modern houses use, with a cement render it means that the internal wall will have this moisture in it and it won't be able to get out. So it'll just kind of sit and be continually damp. Whereas with lime, it means the moisture in the air and the moisture within the wall can seep into the plaster without kind of degrading it in any way, without losing its integrity. It can then be evaporated out, or if it's a hot, humid kind of day inside, that humid air will seep into the walls will absorb it to then release it later. So that's what we mean by breathable. It can take in and expel this moisture. And for an old structure like this, the last thing you want to do is trap any of that behind the stud work or inside of the wall. And unlike what they did back in the day, we're not going to put plaster directly on here because we want some insulation. That insulation as well has got to be breathable and work with the wall. So what we've got to do from this stage is find a level on the wall, and that's easier said than done. Now, because the wall goes in and out, we've got to use a laser to find out what bit of the wall protrudes the most, and that gives us our line in. So here, for example, you can see it touches at the bottom, but then as it goes up, it comes further and further away from the wall. And once we've figured out where that straight line in the wall is, that gives us the base plate of the new framing on the inside. But not only that, we've got to make the framing square within the room. So we've got to go from wall to wall and find the 90 degrees. Later on, that'll pay off because as we start putting furniture in here, tiling in here, if the walls are not completely 90 degrees and create this square within it, the whole thing will just become difficult and work really strangely. So once we've got all them squared up, we're going to be putting an aluminium or galvanized steel frame in front of that. So we'll build that frame up from floor to ceiling. You'll have seen me do this steel frame many times before at the beginning of the channel when I was renovating the old farmhouse. It's something that's very, very commonly used in France, not quite yet in other areas like the UK, but it's certainly coming along. What it means is that frame will never rot, it will never be affected by moisture the same as wood will, and it's perfectly straight. And it's just as strong, if not stronger, by the time you get all the plasterboard in there. Then within that frame we can add the insulation. So the frame is generally from 5 to 7 centimetres thick, so that's the amount of insulation we'll be putting in. We'd love to add obviously a lot more insulation to the walls, but we're somewhat stumbled by the dimensions of the windows and the fact that there was not originally insulation in here. They haven't accommodated the reveals to take any more. So that's a minimum really we can get away with, but we're going to do it properly with the right insulation. Yeah, and that insulation is going to be the same Rockwool product, albeit a different size, and that means it won't be absorbing the moisture. We'll then put the vapour barriers, and probably here is going to be mainly panelling, but if not, it's going to be the plasterboard on that. It'll all be concealed, you won't be able to know it's a stud frame. We're going to do it, like I say, absolutely minimally. And there's an unbelievable amount of that to do. There's an unbelievable amount of recoating the walls to get them stable to do. There's an unbelievable amount of framing to do. We'll make the choice on some areas whether we frame or, like I said, because we've got such fine tolerances between all the reveals of the windows, some of that will be a dot and dab where we stick the insulation and plasterboard directly to the walls. So that's why in some walls, like in here, we're going to the extra effort to make sure that undercoat is really flat, so that when we come to stick the insulation in, we're not going to compensate too much for the lumps and bumps in the wall. But there's a lot to do. So what we decided to do to make the project more manageable is start with one section of the chateau. So it's a whole third of the chateau this way, which we know to be waterproof now, so we can progress with this. We can get all the lime done, we can get the framing done, we can get the permanent floors down, the permanent OSB, and we can kind of tick off 1/3 at a time. And hopefully for you guys that's great as well, so you don't see 2 months of us spraying lime on walls. It's going to be broken up a little bit. Plus, it gets our head around things, and have you seen just from how we put the floors in, the more we do something, the more slicker it gets. So by the time we get to the next thirds of the chateau, we'll have a system in place and it'll all go super, hopefully, smoothly. And now we can get that framing done without knowing exactly where all the utilities are going. There's a lot to be run behind these walls, obviously, electric, heating, water, ventilation. But we can get that framing in and we can leave it open so that we can run everything we need to run, and then we're not hindering ourselves later by having to take off facings and plasterboard to run something. And speaking of running things, we're going to zone the whole chateau. So what we want to try and avoid is the electric coming in at one point in the chateau and hundreds of wires having to go up and down the chateau and us finding voids for them. It's going to be really difficult. So what we're going to do is zone the chateau. We're going to zone it floor by floor. So each floor will have a box like this where all the electrics for that floor run to. Then we've just got one wire running from that down the chateau. So it limits the runs, saves money, and it stops us having this huge conduit of cables around the whole chateau. We're going to do the same with the plumbing. Instead of having a hub completely in the basement and running all the hot water and all the heating from there, we're going to zone it. So we take a cold pipe onto each level, and each level will have either its own hot water boiler or its own heat exchange for the heating. So all that's coming up and down the chateau is one really thin little water pipe up and down. Should make the place super efficient. It should be easy to diagnose problems as well. You know, if lights or sockets are lost in a room above, we know it's to do with the circuit on that floor. We're not trudging the whole chateau to flick kind of switches here and there. So hopefully it's all going to work really well. And there's obviously a lot of planning in that to do. We've got an electrician helping us with kind of the separating everything on each level thing. We've kind of got our head around that. We've got the people we need for it. The heating is going to be another thing. I need to get a company to come out and give us a whole plan of the chateau. We're going to use an air to heat system. So there's basically going to be no radiators in the chateau other than maybe a couple in the bathrooms. What we are going to have is hot air vents in every room, and that's going to give us a system where we can heat the whole chateau comfortably, and we can still zone that off floor by floor as well. So we need a company really to come out who knows about that thing, that can recommend what size pipes need to go in each room, how big the system needs to be. Yeah, there's a lot of planning to do in all that, in running things up and down. But if we can zone it, it limits us having to create these big spaces where we need to run stuff up and down, and we should be able to easily get everything in behind framing, and there'll be no awkward kind of boxing in of anything. You know, we're going to minimize that at least. So hopefully that's made it clearer. Now there are just a few little points I want to touch on from previous videos that people either I haven't explained properly or people haven't understood. So we've been spraying the walls with just plain old water before we do the lime, and that's in an aid to stop all these dry walls just sucking up the moisture instantly, and it'll make them adhere better. So that's the thing I've been spraying on the walls beforehand. Super important actually to get a good stick. When I was doing the insulation down there, I also sprayed something on the beams. And that's just a treatment against rot, mould, woodworm. It's kind of an all-in-one thing. Now, all the beams we buy are already treated, but when I'm thinking like this could be the last time for 70 years that these are left open, we may as well just give it one more go over for good luck to make the wood last as long as possible. And the next thing is, a lot of you have been concerned about the size of the water pipe coming into the chateau. Now when we got the chateau connection, we explained to the water board exactly what it was for. We said we needed an industrial connection. So that connection comes off the main kind of water pipe for the whole village. There's only about 3 meters from the main water pipe to our connection. So we've got the maximum flow. And flow in France, the pressure of the water is super, super high. Actually, you cannot even buy like pressure power showers here. They're just not needed because the pressure's so high in France. So that comes into our meter in a 32 millimeter bore pipe. So we've just took a 32 millimeter off it. There's no point going bigger, we wouldn't gain anything. So 32 should be enough to give pressure to the whole chateau. Now it depends how we manifold that. Obviously we've got to keep it in as big a bore pipe as we can and then manifold it off as we need it. That should be more than enough pressure for the whole chateau. It's certainly standard for France, so that should be more than enough. Don't worry, we'll be able to get a shower. Anyway, that's about it, because we've mainly just been doing the rendering this week. That's all I've got to really go over. Next week will be a little bit different, and I'll do a Sunday breakdown for you then. But in the meantime, watch the normal videos through the week and watch progress. Anyway, see ya Monday.